From friend to foe, the United States, President Trump's United States, now a threat to Europe. Tonight, the transatlantic divide deeper than ever before. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
For the first time in our history, in an increasingly multipolar external world, so many are becoming openly anti-European or Eurosceptic at best. Particularly the change in Washington puts the European Union in a difficult situation. We cannot surrender to those who want to weaken or invalidate the transatlantic bond. We should today remind our American friends of their own motto: united we stand, divided we fall.
We asked the people of the UK if they wanted to leave the European Union. They decided they did.
Why did the Secretary lead this country into a position of such weakness?
Trust the people.
Well, welcome to the program, everyone. We begin the day with two Donalds, two world powers, and one unthinkable on everyone's mind. For the first time, the European Union views the United States as a threat to its stability. Today, the president of the European Council, Donald Tusk, placed the United States under President Donald Trump in the same category as China, Russia, and radical Islam. Now, Tusk made the comments in a letter to 27 European leaders, and he repeated his comments at a meeting in the Estonian capital, Tallinn. Mr. Tusk went on to say that the EU is facing more dangerous challenges than ever before, the United States' current administration being only the latest. Now, those are quite unprecedented comments from an EU leader about the United States. Take a listen.
Today we are dealing with threats which have previously not occurred, at least not on such a scale. And increasingly, let's call it assertive China, especially on the seas, Russia's aggressive policy towards Ukraine and its neighbors, wars, terror and anarchy in the Middle East and in Africa, with radical Islam playing a major role, as well as worrying declarations by the new American administration, all make our future highly unpredictable. For the first time in our history, in an increasingly multipolar external world, so many are becoming openly anti-European or Eurosceptic at best. Particularly the change in Washington puts the European Union in a difficult situation.
Yeah, incredible comments there. I'm joined now by our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane. She's here at the big table. Melinda, it's good to have you with us. And from Brussels, our correspondent, Oliver Salet, and from our Washington studio, Maya Schwader. Good evening to all of you. Melinda, let me start with you. I mean, this really is unprecedented. We have the European Union, a leader in the EU, now classifying the United States as a threat.
Well, perhaps we shouldn't say the European Union. Donald Tusk does not officially speak for all of Europe. He chairs meetings of European leaders, and his role is essentially to get their minds focused on important issues, which is what he is doing here. There is a summit coming up, and he's basically saying these are the big issues that are on the table for us right now. Nonetheless, he did put relations with the U.S. In an unusual context here, saying Europe is facing some big risks, and then he listed a rising China, he listed an assertive Russia, he listed Turkey, and then suddenly he's listing the U.S. That is quite unusual. And he said he assumes that most of these EU leaders do agree with him, and I think he's on pretty certain terrain in doing so. And then he says everything that they are seeing basically contravenes 70 years of U.S. foreign policy. So, yes, there is strong concern. When I'm out there talking to people in Germany in the last week or so since the inauguration, I'm hearing real anxiety about where transatlantic relations might be headed.
Yeah, you're hearing a lot of anxiety. Oliver, let me ask you from your position there in Brussels. I mean, was this move, this comment by Mr. Tusk, was it foreseeable? I mean, did you see it coming?
The EU was slow to respond on that threat posed by the US government. But on the other hand, there were many European politicians who have repeatedly stressed, let's just wait and see how this new US government under Donald Trump would actually act once it's in power. And it's in power now for 2 weeks. And we've seen at which speed Donald Trump and his administration is signing one executive order after the other. And we also remember his standpoints towards the European Union. He said Brexit is a great thing, and he supports a breakup of the European Union. He calls the EU itself just a vehicle for Germany. And that sounds very alarming here to politicians of the European Union. And it's clear that at some point people had to realize that the US might now turn from a friend that it used to be and from a very close ally into a potential enemy. And the EU had to take a standpoint at some point.
And Maya, what about from Washington? Are we getting any reaction from the White House or members of Congress?
Well, frankly, no, we're not. This has been a very busy day in Washington, and the U.S. media is still very wrapped up in covering this executive order that Trump signed, banning people from certain Muslim countries from entering the U.S. We also have some Supreme Court nominees that are coming through, and we know that foreign policy is not very high on Donald Trump's agenda. Really, the only foreign policy matter that he has concerned himself with has been Brexit. Now, looking at that, it's possible to perhaps derive that he does maybe support a breakup of the European Union. But I also want to qualify that what Donald Tusk says was that Donald Trump poses a threat to the European Union and not the United States as a whole. So it's easy to conflate the two, but what we should be looking for is what else Donald Trump says, if anything, in the future about the EU.
And it's interesting, isn't it, Melinda, just listening to Maya speaking there, it's not even on the radar right now in Washington. Is the European Union then perhaps maybe, trying to be proactive in this era of Trump, are they overreacting?
Well, there's a couple of different points to be made in that regard. One is there is no unified European reaction at the moment. We have some European leaders making much stronger statements than others. Actually, Chancellor Merkel had tried to remain sort of low-key on all of this. As you know, she had a long phone call on last Saturday, with President Trump. After that, there was a protocol that was released of the conversation that didn't even initially mention the ban on migration from these 7 key countries. Only the next day was that brought up, and in fact, her statements, as I said, have been somewhat lower key. So there are differences, but the point is, at least this ban does impact on European countries. Countries with double citizens, and there are hundreds of thousands of people in Germany with double citizenship, apparently up to 130,000 with double citizenship involving these 7 countries, they will be affected by this. So this is now a very concrete matter for European governments. And for that reason, I think we are seeing a stronger reaction. Is it overreaction? People are concerned. I think there's no cause for hysteria. We have to wait and see what other measures will still follow from Washington. And does it have an impact on Washington? I think Maya is quite right. America first means listen to America first. There's not a lot of listening going on as to what's happening here in Europe. Yeah,
that's a very good point, Melinda. And Maya, President Trump, he's not a fan of the EU. I mean, he hasn't tried to hide that either. Are these comments from Mr. Tusk, are they playing into the hands of a U.S. leader who thinks that more countries should leave the EU?
Well, it will certainly have a cooling effect, it seems. And as said before, it's very early in the administration. There's not much we can do but sit and wait to see what will happen next. What I see happening is perhaps more countries in the EU who may want to distance themselves from the EU, if not outright leave, may use this as leverage to say, hey, look, the U.S. is distancing itself from the EU. The U.S. doesn't like the EU anymore. The EU doesn't like the U.S. anymore. We want closer ties with the U.S., therefore we shouldn't be so close to the EU. We could possibly see this happening with the rise of some anti-EU countries coming up in some elections that are happening in the EU in the next year.
And Oliver, put all of this, if you can, into concrete terms for us. If the EU, or at least some leaders, if they now view the U.S. under Trump as a threat, what can Europe do, or what will it be able to do?
So the U.S. might be interested in something like a trade war. I mean, Donald Trump has suggested very high taxes, for instance, on German cars, on any other goods that are not produced inside the United States. And there's a lot of protectionism in his policies. So the EU, what it has to do now is, and what it is already doing, it's looking for other international partners, especially when it comes to free trade agreements. And there are several free trade agreements in the making right now as we speak. There's one with Canada that was already negotiated that just needs to be implemented. There's another free trade agreement with Japan that is about to be finished. Several others are in the pipeline, so that will certainly change the trade regime as in comparison to what we've had in recent decades. In addition to that, a very important point for the EU now is political unity, simply, and that is really crucial. Europe needs to stand together as one entity and not, divided and debating about their positions, which is something very difficult right now. We're going to have very many elections here all across the European Union. Right-wing parties are on the rise, so this will certainly be a major challenge for the European Union in the year to come.
And not just for the EU, I'm wondering, what does it mean for NATO if you have the EU and the US now in very adversarial positions?
Donald Trump called NATO obsolete, and then later when Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, visited him, he said he's 100% behind NATO. So what this tells us is nothing less than we cannot say for sure how the policies are going to look like. The new U.S. government is simply unpredictable. And now, especially, there's one question that is raised here in Brussels, and that's what about the security guarantees of NATO? Now, even if NATO continues to exist the same way, are they still valid? To be precise, what happens, for instance, if Russia decides to invade any of the Baltic countries? Will the United States intervene? Those are questions that are openly raised here in Brussels and that put the future of NATO in itself at stake. And it will certainly be a necessary response to that, to create and to gear up the military inside Europe. Again, this will be a very complicated and long process for the years to come.
Melinda, let me let you have the first word here. When we talk about the German Chancellor, you mentioned her earlier. I mean, when she talked with the U.S. president on Saturday and maybe gave him a tutorial on what the Geneva Conventions mean, for example, and the U.S.'s obligation to accept refugees. That was in the protocol. Is she making these statements and releasing these as a position of strength, or are we seeing a more cautious leader? She is the most powerful leader in Europe.
I think she's basically doing what she did in her very first message to him after he was elected. You may recall that she sent him her congratulations, but she listed what she declared as the basis for the transatlantic relationship. She said it is based on values, and then she proceeded to list them. And they included human rights, the rule of law, and other fundamental principles of Western...
Do you remember her ever doing that with President Obama?
Of course not, because it was understood. And so what she is doing here, again, on Saturday, is putting those out there. Now, part of that, of course, is to try to signal to him our relations will depend on these being fulfilled. In other words, if you flagrantly violate international law, I may have a hard time paying you a state visit. That may be implicit in that message. But there's another message here, too, and that's to the domestic political audience. We have elections coming up here in September. She needs to be seen as being strong, as being resolute, and I think that is the right way for Germany to proceed, to be self-confident, to lead by example, and to say these are the values we stand for, and we're going to take that high road. The high road. Our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane, our Brussels correspondent, Oliver Salet, and in Washington, our correspondent, Maya Schwader. To all of you, thank you very much for being on the day. We appreciate it. Well, tonight, some clarity following the chaos created by the Trump travel ban issued on those 7 countries. Now, the German government says that German citizens who have a second non-U.S. passport will be able to visit the United States as long as their documents are in order. Now, that's a relief for some, but not for everyone. And that includes a research student here in Berlin with an Iranian passport. Here's her story.
Her work is all about problem solving, but now she has one she didn't expect. Mana, a PhD candidate, does research at the School of Design Thinking at the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Berlin. She spent the past week following news out of the U.S., fearful that Donald Trump would follow through on his campaign promises. Now the travel ban is jeopardizing her work.
I was planning to fly to San Francisco with all my research fellows on Friday. And 3rd of February. And this is part of our research program. Basically, we have this collaboration between Hasso-Plattner Institute and Stanford University, and we meet twice a year, once in Stanford and once in Potsdam.
But now she has to miss the conference, even though she has a valid visa to enter the United States. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has voiced strong criticism of the U.S. travel ban. The fight against terrorism does not justify a general suspicion against people of a certain belief or people from a certain country. Above all, we must take care to legally protect citizens with dual nationality who live in Germany. In the meantime, Germany's Foreign Office announced that German citizens with dual citizenship in one of the 7 countries named in the ban can still enter the U.S. But Mana holds only an Iranian passport, so that doesn't apply to her. The Hasso-Plattner Institute fears the ban will endanger its international research. The free flow of ideas, especially scientific ones, directly depends on worldwide exchange. It's far more productive for all participants than trapping them behind walls. Because of the travel ban, Mana's doctoral thesis will have to be put on hold for another year. It's one problem her research work cannot solve.
And picking up on that travel ban, we have a report coming in that about 900 officials at the U.S. State Department have signed an internal dissent memo, a letter basically saying that they do not agree with President Donald Trump's travel ban on those 6 Muslim-majority countries. And we are getting reaction from the White House as well. White House spokesman Sean Spicer reportedly saying that he is aware of the memo, and he has said that those career diplomats should either, and I'm quoting, get with the program or they can go.